Hi everyone, thank you for joining me on another episode of I'm Probably Wrong About Everything. On today's podcast we have Trevor Kolins sharing with us the process of writing a novel, putting it together, some of the habits that have helped him in successfully completing some of his work. He has 3 novels that he's completed, one of which has been self-published, that you can get today for free on Kobo called Decay Theory. You can read that on any digital app that you have, and another one that he's looking to get published currently. So it was a great chat, and I hope you enjoy. Thanks for listening. Trevor Kolins here today, and we're going to talk about writing and his take on the writing process. He's going to tell us a little bit of some of the stuff that he's worked on. So Trevor, thank you for having me today. Thank you for the Monster energy drink.
Hey, you got it, man. I'm always supplying.
Yeah. My dog, Kona, is also joining us today, so she might have things to say. So, how do you come up with your ideas for writing?
Well, I'm gonna quote here. Actually, I got this quote from Brandon Sanderson, who's a famous fantasy author. He got the quote from someone else. I can't remember who. It escapes me at the moment. But basically what he says is...
Quoting a quote.
Quoting a quote.
Yeah.
Paraphrasing a quoting of a quote.
Right.
He basically says ideas are cheap. And when I first started writing, like seriously, like actually sitting down and writing books, this isn't something I knew at the time or even thought about. I thought you needed this like crazy, you needed this huge plan and stuff. But you, like, if you really think about it, and we can talk about this a little later about writing process and what goes in. If you're a professional writer, you're an author, you're writing books, you're putting out a book every year or whatever. You can't sit there and take a year or 2 years or 3 years to come up with these crazy ideas.
Right. You
can come up with something very simple. And again, Brandon Sanderson actually talks about this in one of his lectures, which is available on YouTube. He goes, he looks at his audience and goes, you give me one idea real quick and you give me another idea. And basically it comes down to this. He goes, someone says, Roman Empire. And the other one says, Pokemon. And then he goes, all right. And there's actually a book. It's I can't remember who it's by. It's called the something Codex or something.
Right.
And that's basically what the book is.
Right.
That
right.
is what inspired that idea for the book. Just one or two simple ideas. Oh, boom. And then he put the book together. But the thing is you have a lot more going on in the book, and you want to create good characters, and that's what drives your story. And that stuff is arguably way more important than the actual idea itself.
Have you heard of the hero's journey?
Yep.
That this kind of you look at Harry Potter, Star Wars, Lion King, love that movie, and there's this kind of static, like here they are, they're a normal person, they discover a mythical pole or whatever. They become super. They enter this underground world, Homer's Odyssey, right?
Or they actually die and get reborn.
Sure, right? Yeah. There's this period of death, rebirth. Mm-hmm. They come out of it, and then they return back to their normal life, but they have that journey with them.
Yeah.
Every amazing story that we look at follows a similar pattern.
A lot of them.
A lot of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Is that something that you incorporate? Is this hero's journey into your...
Well, nothing really that I've written so far. Some like if for creative writing, if you actually take classes or attend lectures or anything from writers or people that are professors in writing or whatever, English professors, that is something that I actually talk about. And there's other we call it like an outline of your story. One of them actually that doesn't fall into the hero's journey is it's kind of like your sports team type thing, where you have this like Air Bud. You have this person who's potentially socially outcast, maybe handicapped. They're unable to be on the team or part of the group. And then they kind of find their way, and then they prove to everyone that they can through other means. So that's another outline of a story.
But that is similar to this hero's journey.
It could be, yeah.
Right?
So yeah, like some advice you could give someone that's wanting to construct a story is here's an example of a hero's journey.
Yeah.
You can kind of look at that and use that to outline your own story. I don't really do that.
Right.
I already wrote books before I even thought about that.
How long have you been writing for?
I'll say I started writing really early. But not so. I have a really weird history of writing. I kind of started getting ideas and writing stuff down. I have like my little journal. I have so many of these little notebooks everywhere that they don't even make sense to me anymore.
Right.
I would say I probably started writing stuff down in my late teens, early 20s. The very first book I ever wrote was a fantasy book called The Ancients of Seasons. I started getting the idea or the premise for that book probably around 20, maybe 19. I wrote down like a chapter at some point, but I didn't actually start writing that book until I was about 24. I remember it was like my last year in university is when I actually I sat down and I started writing. But then again, I didn't even finish it until I was like 26. And I think about that time where I actually started sitting down seriously writing that book is what I would consider my writing. I don't want to call it a career yet, but like that is when I started. Right. I think so. About 26. I'm almost 31. So about 5 years, I'd say I've been writing
consecutively.
Yeah.
Because it sounds like you describe it as, you don't wait for inspiration. You just start writing. Mm-hmm. Right. And it's the act of doing it daily.
Yeah. And that's actually a good point. I think a lot of people have this view of writing that it is inspirational. And I kind of want to debunk that myth right here because I don't think inspiration plays zero part in what you're writing. For instance, if we're talking about like a nonfiction, let's say your friend's great grandma was an Auschwitz survivor and you heard her story and you're like, wow, that is great. I need to write this. That is a genuine inspiration to get that idea to write that. But then from there on out, I don't think inspiration plays a part anymore. You have to have routine. You have to practice. Writing is a craft and it's a skill and it's a discipline. Inspiration accounts for such a small percentage of your process to actually finish and write that book. But yeah, I mean, as far as where ideas come from and stuff, like I said, ideas are cheap. I can just be driving home from work and be like, oh, that's a cool idea, boom, and I'll start writing something.
So how did Stephen King become Stephen King? Because I mean, like you said, ideas are cheap. That guy could make a story out of anything. Yeah. How did he become the most successful fictional writer of all time?
Well, I would say you probably want to grab his biography for that one, but I could make a couple points. I mean, you got to start somewhere. You got to put your first book. I can't remember what his very, very first. He did write some short stories and stuff very early on, and that's important. And writing in general, it's like anything, right? It's like going to the gym and getting some gains. You can't just do it here and there. If you
actually get your reps in.
Exactly. You got to do it consistently. It's got to become routine, and then you get better, and then you start seeing improvement, and then you get stronger, and then you can put on more gains. And I like to look at it similar to writing. I've written technically 3 books now. I'm a lot better than I was when I first started, and I know I have a long way to go. Like I know some authors. So there's actually a statistic here. Authors who are currently published and sell books, on average, write 4 books before the first one gets published. And there's cases of really famous authors who wrote 12 books before they actually started selling any. So you got to think, that's how many years and how many times you've written a book before you started seeing your craft improve, before you could sit there and go, or maybe not you, but other people start going, wow, this is actually good work. So yeah, it's definitely a process. So going back to the Stephen King question, I would say that's probably a huge part of it is he was just writing. And I don't know how long they went in tandem with each other, but he was a teacher, right? He had a day job. He did it on the side, like a lot of authors. So yeah, I would say he kept working at it. Maybe a good idea came on top of when his craft was improving, and they kind of went hand in hand together. And that idea, whatever, I can't remember if it was like Misery or one of his very first books. Good idea on top of good writing,
right? And
that's where it takes off.
It's not so many people, and I think this ties into just motivation in general. But so many people are like, "Yeah, I'm going to do that tomorrow." Right? Yeah. And I mentioned before that procrastination is Latin for of tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. Yesterday, you said today.
Yes. right? And we're waiting for things to do it for us, which is why I have so much more admiration for the people who are in the arena, than the spectators that criticize them, right? Well, let's see you write a better book. Okay, I'll get right on that, right? So the point I'm trying to make is, it really, like, Michael Jordan didn't just wait for inspiration to become the greatest basketball player of all time.
Yeah.
Right? The other thing is that when you write that book that's published, right, it's interesting because then all the other stuff that you've written before, people want to now consume that. So it's this weird kind of effect.
Yeah.
Is that true, would you say?
Yeah. I mean, in my case, the stuff I've written before, if some my self-published book right now, Decay Theory, which is available on Kobo.com.
Yeah.
If people read that and are like, wow, I really like this, and I do have some other stuff that I've written. I have some short stories and stuff, and if that were available, I'd be like, I think this stuff's kind of bad. But
right.
But I think part of what you said goes back to, you want to see the roots or the origins, and you want to see other stuff. Like when I what's an example, I guess. I think that's pretty common. Like if you read the Harry Potter books, or if you read the Lord of the Rings, and you never read the Hobbit, you'd be like, oh, I know there's another book by.
Did the Hobbit come out before the Lord of the Rings?
Yeah, I think so. I think the Hobbit was the first.
Right.
Yes, I believe so.
And that's pretty interesting because The Hobbit is not nearly as good as Lord of the Rings, right? But kind of like the movies, it's like, well, that made a ton of money. Yeah. Let's now make these prequels. The prequelogy.
Yeah.
That wasn't very good. And to make more money, right? I mean, that's just my stance on the thing. But it's interesting that, yes, we love what an author's doing, and then it's like music, right?
You hear a few songs, and then you want to check out their other albums.
You check out their catalog, right? Like Megadeth, you hear a new song, you're like, whoa, and then you hear the old stuff, and you're like, that was really good, right?
Thrashing, bro.
Yeah. So it's interesting how, we wait for that big break, but then once we get that break, that's like a mass effect, right? Like everything becomes something that people want to consume.
And just as a sidebar point, that the thing with like arts or anything in music, writing, you really don't know if we're just talking about like when something takes off,
right?
Like those you write a book and then boom, it blows up overnight. You really have no idea that's going to happen, and you could. And there's a lot of authors, if we're talking about creative writing out there, that I'll read a book by them and I'll be like, wow, they actually have like 40 books and I've never even heard of this person. But yeah, that's how it starts, right? And then you might read their other stuff and be like, hey, you might not like it. It might be different.
Right.
But then you'll be like, I really like this author. I want to check out all their other stuff. We have no idea how that's going to happen, right? That could just blow up overnight. And then you maybe wrote 15 books and you're kind of just doing okay. And that one book just kind of seals the deal. It really kickstarts your career or whatever.
And it's interesting because, like you're describing, there's not a formula for success, right? You don't know what's going to catch on.
Yeah. Well, I would say that there's probably books out there that would argue that there is a formula for success. Sure. And I think there's a point where, and this goes back to what we were talking about earlier about discipline and routine. If you're trying to make a career out of writing books, which is something I'm trying to do, you gotta keep at it. Even in the face of adversity and failure and criticism, which anybody that knows anything about putting their work out there for an audience, that's just a reality you have to face. But yeah, you got to keep at it. You can't just write one book and be like, all right, I'm done. I'm probably going to make millions now. Like that you're in the less than 1 percentile of people that happens to. So yeah, like as far as a formula for success would be to keep going, to keep doing it and keep pushing. But I think that's really probably about it. You can always try to better yourself, improve yourself, read more books, learn more about the market. You can do things that can improve your chances. But again, like I'll use music as an example because I play music, I write music. Something I learned really early on is there's people out there that are so good at the guitar. They're just like I could be as good as them if I tried and pushed and for years later, you know what I mean? But they're so good and no one even knows who they are. They do that on the side. They work at Starbucks. And it's like they have such talent, but they're not getting any recognition. And that's just a reality that anybody that's an artist has to face too, right? You could be famous in a year. You could spend your whole life doing it and not really make it anywhere. Yeah. Which is, it's a sad truth, but it is the truth.
I like what you said about, you can't just do this one thing and then think it. Again, it's similar to goals in anything. Like, if you have a goal to lose, I want to lose 5 pounds. Mm-hmm. You lose 5 pounds, but then you gain it again.
Yeah, because that happens to a lot of people.
Right, because the goals aren't consistent. It's like a check and then you're done. Mm-hmm. Which is why we need to go for bigger goals. And I read this book, Atomic Habits, easy to read book. And there's one thing that really stuck out, and it's about we have to have goals that are part of our identity, right? So instead of saying, I want to lose 5 pounds, which is like a checkpoint, you're done. It's, I want to live a healthier lifestyle. Mm-hmm. And then you lose the 5 pounds, and then you lose 5 more. Mm-hmm. And then you're at a healthy weight that you're just maintaining. But because that's who you are as a person, it's your identity. You're able to maintain it. So what would you say your goals are?
Well, for me, so I have a hard time. A lot of people have this idea that writing a book is challenging, which it is. But I think once, and I would say a lot of authors, a lot of fiction authors agree on this, is you write your first draft, and then it's the second and third draft that are actually the hardest. Those require the most amount of discipline. You have to make tough decisions. They call it killing your babies, where you have to go, okay, what's not working in this book? Right. I wrote this character, I'm kind of attached to them, but maybe they're not working. This process at this stage in your book writing process is very challenging, and
so you have to get rid of whole sections that have a character.
Yep, and a lot of so as far as like formulas go, what a lot of authors do, and this is kind of where I'm at right now, is you write your first draft, and then you sit there and go, is this any good? And a lot of authors write books, and they go, this is kind of crap, and they scrap it, and they start a new project. Because from there on out, you're committing a lot of time and energy to drafting and revising that book now. A lot of authors draft their book 5, 6, 7, even 10 times before it's a finished product. And a lot of people don't know this. They think that you write a book, you edit it up a few times, and you're good. And that's just not reality. There are authors. I actually read an interview from a newly published author. She said she wrote her book, and that was it. I would say that happens almost never. That is.
And was this a fiction or non-fiction book?
I think it was a literary fiction book.
Right.
Okay. Or a historical fiction or something like that. Yeah. She wrote it about something where she grew up and.
Right.
I didn't read the book, but I just read her interview. But that is so rare. Yeah. That just doesn't happen in reality. It might happen here and there, but that's like a fluke. Because even the best authors in the world, we mentioned Stephen King, a lot of these authors, famous authors, will write a draft, their very first draft, their run through of their book. They'll even say it's garbage. Like the writing quality is crap. And that's because you're just trying to get through it, right? You're trying to get all your ideas down. You're trying to construct your chapters. You're trying to make ends meet. But your first run through is not your final product. And for me now, the hardest point is, like, I just finished a book. So I'm kind of in my second draft phase right now, which is challenging. And I try to stick to a writing routine, which can be hard because I work 9 hours a day, five days a week at my other job. So I sometimes just don't feel like writing. But I'll sit down and I'll go, oh, man, I just wrote this book and I was excited. And now I got to go through it all and make all these hard decisions. I got to scrutinize the characters. I got to make sure everything, there's continuity. I got to make sure everything matches. Are the characters good? Like, just these simple questions and sometimes challenging questions. that's the hardest point. So for me right now, it's kind of like that. It's kind of like we go back to this gym analogy. You're going once or twice a week. You're doing good, but you're not seeing any gains.
You're plateauing.
Yeah, you really need to see that 3 or 4 times a week.
Right.
And that, for a lot of people, is hard because it requires time, commitment, energy. So that's, for me right now, that's where I'm at. And so your question about the goal is to kind of, I need to figure that out for myself. I need to be more constructive during this period. Because we go back to the last book I wrote. This process here on the second or third draft that I mentioned actually took the longest. And I think that's normal. I wrote Decay Theory in like 3 months.
How many words was Decay Theory?
I think it's 40.
Like decay as in like rotting?
Yeah.
Right.
It's about 42,000 words. I think
that's a novella, yeah.
Yeah, so I think on the I think it's like 140 pages or something. Yeah. As far as on the PDF e-reader version, obviously page lengths vary depending on what they're printed on or whatever. But I mean, again, that's a shorter book.
Well, tell us about the books that you've written. So you've got Decay Theory. Mm-hmm. You've got,
which is the only book that's available.
Right.
I've shared other stuff I've written with people, but there's nothing available on the internet or anything right now. So
what are your big projects? So Decay Theory is the one that's available. What are the other? There's 2 other ones, right?
Yeah. So I've written a fantasy book. Mm-hmm. It's intended to be a series. So I wrote this. This is the first book I mentioned that I wrote.
Right. And it's called Seasons.
So right now the title is called The Ancients of Seasons.
Ancients of Seasons.
I basically realized the book wasn't very good. Quite a few years back, and what I decided to do is I'm still in love with the world because I spent so many years building it, and I completely revised the book, like just a flat overhaul. Like I wrote characters in.
Still using the same lore.
Yeah, I used the same world. I actually kept a lot of chapters that I felt were working. I kept stuff that I thought worked, but right. I ultimately rewrote the whole book, and it was like 30,000 words longer too. So I just actually finished what I'm hoping is my last revision. We kind of have this thing where writers always feel like it's never good enough, and we waste a lot of time doing it. And so that's actually a skill where at some point you got to go, this is it. This is final. I'm moving on. So I think I'm right at that phase now. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to seek representation for this through a literary agency. We'll see how that goes. So that's kind of what I'm working on right now. I just finished, like less than a month ago, a new book I'm working on. I can't say I can tell you exactly what the title is now. I think I'm content on the title, but I don't usually like to stress about that stuff too early on. This one's probably up Decay Theory's alley. It's maybe more of a horror.
Okay.
I would say it's kind of similar to The Shining, actually, except in a hotel. They're in the mountains. So that's what I just finished.
So in this book, they're in a hotel?
No, they go on an expedition to.
They're in the mountains.
In the mountains, yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Don't want to talk too much about that right now because I literally just my first draft. So
okay.
I might not even decide I might decide it's not good enough and I might just scrap it. But I like it, and so I'm gonna revise it. I'm gonna see where it goes and see how I feel about it. But that's gonna be at least a few months of work. I think my goal is by the end of the year to have it kind of done. If everything goes well and I'm sticking to it. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, those are like the 3 that I've written. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at right now.
So of the 2 that you can talk about, Decay Theory and Ancients of Seasons, can you give us a bit of a synopsis on both of them?
Yeah, so Decay Theory, and again, if you want to go and look up a little bit of a couple paragraph blurb on what it's about.
Well, Decay Theory is free, right?
Yeah, it is free right now. Again, you can go to kobo.com and pick up a free copy.
Nice plug.
Yep. Might be a few more coming out. Let's slip them in. So this one's just really quickly, it's about a family. It's from the perspective of the mother. They have 2 sons and they lose their eldest son to pneumonia. So that's kind of where the book starts a year later after this event. And the mom especially is going through a really tough time. She's dealing with grief. Especially when her youngest son is waking up in the middle of the night and talking to their oldest son in his room. And, that kind of thing, like, it's just she's just reliving it over and over and over again.
Trauma.
Yeah, so she decides and with her husband that they should move, and they go to where her husband can actually work. He takes this project. He's a geologist. Takes this project in kind of like a remote village, a remote town. So they move and they go there, and they learn that maybe it's not always best to change settings. It's a mystery novella with a supernatural element.
Right.
And yeah.
You got me, I'm like, what happens here? So, you got that one, and then tell us about the Ancients of the Seasons.
So this is a what you would consider a high fantasy. Okay. So, high fantasy, for those that don't know, compared to a low fantasy. A high fantasy would be something like The Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones. It's basically
we're talking a different world.
A different world.
Low fantasy,
different elements. A low fantasy would be something like
Nazi zombies.
Yeah, or Harry Potter, where it's still on Earth with real people.
Yeah, gotcha.
Where there's just a fantasy element that exists in the real world.
Mm-hmm.
Again, this isn't available. I'm not sharing it with anyone yet.
Right.
But it's basically, it's not a dystopian world, but it's 100 years after almost a near extinction event. So it's kind of I don't know if you consider it dystopian in a way. So you're in this post-apocalyptic world, and the premise is basically at one point, the mortal world, so like the humans and the other races, like the orcs and stuff, they came into this huge conflict with the immortal part of the world. So you have dragons, and there's this huge war, and basically almost everyone died.
Right.
So that's where my story starts. Because it's fantasy, you have a lot of different character viewpoints.
And histories.
Yeah, so it's hard to throw a quick. I actually need to work on this because if I
what's your elevator pitch?
Yeah, exactly. If you were a literary agent right now, I would have to work on this, and this is something I am working on. I don't have it concrete yet because I'm, I just finished it, so it's but basically the main protagonist is he's a mixed blood of 2 races, which is kind of a nuanced thing. It's he's seen as a lot of people look down on his race, so he deals with this.
And he's mixed blood in terms of he's human and orc.
He's a human and a race called Kaer, so he's a human and a Kaeran.
Okay.
And the story starts where he's actually in self-imposed exile.
Right.
He dealt with a lot of trauma in his life, and he felt he needed to pull away from the world, so he was just living on his own for 10 years. And the book starts, he's pulled back in when he gets a letter that his father's missing. And that's what kind of kickstarts the start of the story.
So, I mean, this is what I find fascinating, is because you have things like, Game of Thrones, right?
Mm-hmm.
It starts off really strong, and this is something I'm going to ask you about. But then the ending of that show, it was like they were not working with the ending in mind. Mm-hmm. Like the last 2 seasons of that show are garbage. Garbage. Because it was like things were just happening way too fast. So when you wrote the story, without giving it away, did you have the end in mind?
Yeah, and I could... I mentioned this is something we would talk about, but so when it comes to fiction writing, there's basically 2 styles of writing that we we as writers will use. There's discovery writing and there's outlining.
Right.
Some people hold true and just stick to one. They're pure discovery writers.
Yeah. They smoke a ton of dope and they're
Yes.
like, let's see where I go with this.
So outlining is evident. Like you can probably have
storyboarding.
Yeah. So you sit there and you spend time before you start writing and plan out what's going to happen. You plan out kind of character arcs. You plan out major events. You will know the ending. And again, this can change. And my ending for this first book, like I said, it's meant to be a series. So my ending for this book has changed more than once because, and that's kind of a thing too, where you don't want to fall into this, oh, there's going to be a second book, because if you're trying to seek representation and your book doesn't have a good ending, you're, well, yeah, I'm working on a second one. They might just be like, oh, sorry, you're not for us, because it doesn't have a good ending.
Right.
There's no guarantee that someone's going to buy your second book if they don't like the first. If they don't like the first book, there's almost no guarantee they're not going to buy the second book. So you need to have a good ending for your first book. So my ending in that sense has changed quite a bit.
That in some sense it is climactic.
Yeah, or it's just satisfying. It makes sense.
Right.
Like, it's wrapped up enough for that first book, but there's still stuff going on. Obviously, it's an ongoing.
It doesn't end in the middle of in the middle of a conflict.
Yeah.
That you're like, okay, well, what happens?
Yeah. So I mean, if you want to look for an example, a good example would be like the first Harry Potter book. He beats this manifestation of Voldemort who's trying to come back. So at this point, you know who Voldemort is. But the first book has a satisfying ending. He beats him. Yeah. Boom. End of the school year. You know the next book is going to be the start of the school year.
Right.
But Voldemort is still there. So you have
you want more.
Yeah.
There's a bit of a craving there.
So the first book ends, and it was satisfying, but now there's still room for more books.
Right.
And that's something that I really struggled with this book, and that's just mostly being a new writer and not having that wisdom or whatever for working on that. But then discovery writing is when you kind of just sit down and write and let things come out. And stream of consciousness. Yeah, and what I'm finding for me, what works well is I kind of have a loose outline of plot, and I'm starting to learn to discovery write my characters. Because I think one of the major issues I had outlining my characters too much is they weren't organic. It'd be like giving actors scripts and not letting them really act. And that's what it felt like. They just felt like these kind of stale, stick to the script type beings. So how do you bring these characters to life? Well, that's that's the trick, really. I don't know if I'm versed enough or have enough experience under my belt to give you a good answer, but it just takes you practice. And what's really helpful is having people read your work. So we call them alpha readers and beta readers. And basically your alpha readers are your close, like maybe your mom or your dad or your sister. And also if you have an agent, your agent, people that you trust. That could be other writing friends that can give you really good feedback. Yeah. And then your beta readers are kind of like your just general audience. Right. People that, I like this book, please send more. Yeah. So having those betas are typically they're a little bit more agreeable. Yes, alpha readers can be more constructive. Yeah, so just feedback. Really simply, alpha readers are probably your writing friends, your agent. Right. Beta readers are if you're an author and you have a reading list, people that you send your book out to or your pre-released book, those are your beta readers, your audience, your close audience of people that you trust that support you. So having reader, and I don't have a lot of this in my life at the moment, which is unfortunate, but having that criticism, that feedback early on is really helpful, because sometimes you don't see the same thing that someone else is when you read it, and you have a level of attachment to it, like exactly. You want me to get rid of that and part? That's killing your babies. And that is like sometimes a character just doesn't work, and yeah. That's kind of the problem when you outline you're too strict with your outline, and that's something I learned really early on. So I'm kind of adjusting to that a bit. That whole being organic thing, and so I still like to, and especially for this fantasy world, there's a lot of world building. There's a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of history. There's a lot of connections and lore, and so that's for me. I'm not comfortable just discovery writing that, because I like to know all the stuff as I'm writing, because it comes into these characters' cultures and these characters' opinions and how they view the world. If you're just discovering that stuff as you're writing, you're going to spend a lot of time going back and making this stuff work and make sense, which people do, and it works for them. I just don't like it.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, is like you have this sort of eclectic approach of, you have an outline, you have your skeleton, but then as you're writing, you add more structure to it. Like, for example, if you're in a conversation with a character and it's like the guy, he walks into a bar and he's trying to find this person. In real life, if you did that, you wouldn't walk up and be like, "Where's Harold?" Right? You'd walk up and be like, "Yeah, I'll have a drink," and you'll have a conversation, and then it'll come up like you say. But sometimes when we're writing these characters, and I know I've been guilty of it, is it's very like, they're stiff, they're rigid, and they're just trying to get the objective done without really enjoying the journey, so to speak. Like, you watch Lord of the Rings, and I don't know the characters, but he comes up and he's got a pint, and he's like, "I got a pint, I'm going to get hammered," right? So it's not just about them getting to their objective. They're enjoying it or whatever along the way.
Yeah.
Is that it? You want to add more of that, is what you're saying?
Yeah, and a good distinction here, and this is something I, again, learned after kind of my failed first run through of this book, was you're not putting your characters in there to move along with the plot. You want your characters to drive the plot. So, and this goes back to this whole ideas are cheap thing. If you have good characters, your story, your plot could even be a little boring. But if your readers are into your characters, that is a huge advantage.
That's the investment piece.
And I spent a lot of time, going back to the outlining, where I spent so much time trying to outline these really, really cool ideas. And I wanted these ideas to be sick. And my characters were bland. So people were kind of getting lost. They weren't really following. They just weren't into it because the characters weren't doing anything for them. So that's a huge part, and a lot of authors will say your characters are the most important part of your book. And I think that's totally true.
They are the blood vessels that carry the oxygen throughout your body.
Yeah,
and
then this
that's great. You got a set of lungs. It's got to work.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I kind of I don't regret it. I mean, I'm trying not to have regrets, but I feel like I did waste a lot of time trying to push this book because I thought I had a good idea, and I wasn't really focusing on the problems. And the problems at the time were largely my characters, and that's because I outlined them and I put them in the plot to serve the plot. But really, you want your characters to be the driving force of your book.
Well, and I've found that in my own writing, because I try to write every day from my blog, and it's like, it's going to be shit until you do it, right? You have to do it, and the act of continuing to do things, it gets better, right? But until then, like, I have worries about, like, I'm putting this out there, and it's like, oh my goodness, am I going to look like an idiot? So, and I probably will. But that's also how you get better. You have to kind of take that, swallow it, right? Swallow your pride or whatever, and just go for it. So how do you deal with criticism and failure?
Well, still being a new author, I haven't had the we'll say the years of experience that other authors who are well known do, obviously. But yeah, that's a big obstacle to overcome. And we were talking before we started airing this podcast. I was talking to you about pitching my book to an agent. And this is super stressful. It's basically applying for a job. And to go back to this, if you're unemployed, you need a job, right? You got to feed yourself.
Yeah.
So you have to put yourself out there. You have to apply to these jobs, even if you don't think you're the right fit, even if you're not totally qualified. You still need to do it.
Yeah.
Now, there's nothing. I have a job, so my writing's not paying the bills right now. I'd like it to pay the bills.
Me neither.
So it's not quite the same.
It's a passion.
Yeah, it's not quite the same as being unemployed and needing a job because you need to live. But it is, yeah. Whenever you do something, if you're an artist, like when I was whenever I wrote songs or I was playing guitar, I had that feeling every time I had an audience or I was sharing it with someone. Oh, they're gonna think this is crap, or maybe this isn't that good. And these are thoughts that will go through your head no matter what. But yeah, you just got to learn to. I mean, there are people who are just like, screw it. Yeah. Like, I don't care what anyone thinks.
Right.
And honestly, that's not a bad way to be.
Yeah. You write the book that you want to read.
Yeah, and
not what you want the audience to read.
And that's something I'm trying to. I don't want to say persuade myself, but I actually I was talking to someone the other day, and they kind of asked me a similar question, and because I told them I was having a hard time. Just with the whole COVID-19 thing going on, just writing and having a routine. Because you see my office. My office is 6 feet from us right now, and then I walk over and I start writing, and it's really hard. Right. And so
it's creating that space, the set, and the setting.
Yeah. And so, anyways, the question was basically, well, because I think he asked, or I said I'm a little unsure of my my book right now. I think I was talking about the fantasy book, and I'm like, it could be better. I know it could be better. But it's like, well, do I just say, and I'll move on, or do I really push to try to see if anyone wants to represent me? And anyways, long story short, the question was basically, well, are you gonna keep writing even in the face of failure? And obviously, at the time, the easy question was yes, but I actually thought that this was an interesting question, because if you were to tell me right now that I would never become a famous author, and I'll probably only sell a few dozen copies of anything, and that's really about it, would you keep writing? And that's hard, because if you know you're going to fail at something for the rest of your life, you're going to be like, ooh, maybe I should do something else. But if it's your passion and you like doing it anyways, who cares? And that's kind of where...
Is that really failure?
Well, yeah, and it's like what you said, I want to write what I want to write, and for me, that's kind of true. I have so many ideas. I could write you a 600-page book of all the book ideas I have, and unfortunately, even if I was the best writer on the planet and the most efficient, I would never get them done, but I'm still going to do it anyways. I'm still going to write books, and I'm still going to do it, even if it doesn't warrant success in the end.
So the goal of becoming successful and famous, that's not holding you back from doing what you want to do in terms of your creativity.
Yeah, and it's kind of this a good funny way to think about this. I used to play baseball, and you have a lot of, and you can actually see this in the major leagues. You can see these guys, and they go for these huge home run swings, and then they strike out. And the thought here is, if you want to hit a home run, obviously these are professional players, so I'm not trying to... There's a huge difference between professional players and average blokes like myself. But if you're going up to the plate every time, and I'm swinging for the fences, I'm going to hit a home run, you're probably not going to. When you hit the home runs, and I wasn't a huge home run hitter. I was more of like a single, double hitter. The home runs I hit, I wasn't even thinking about it. All I went up there was, I'm going to make contact with the ball. And when I did, boom, it would go over the fence. It's kind of like that, right? You don't want to sit here and go, oh, this book's going to make me famous. And
I'm going to make millions.
Yeah, because like we were saying earlier in the podcast is, that's kind of like the 1 percentile, right? Your chances are that's not going to happen. And that's just math, simple statistics. And that's cool. The trick, or whatever you want to call it, is to just, you enjoy doing it and you stick to it.
Yeah.
And you might find success, right? You can't be held back by this idea of, I need to be famous or I'm just going to give up.
The other thing too, it's this idea of selling your soul to the devil, right? You write a book that you hate, and that becomes you, and then that's what you have to keep doing and keep producing, and you hate it, right? Like think about this is a poor analogy, but Justin Bieber, like his music is shit lyrically, like the themes are garbage. Whereas you have somebody like...
Well, he has one of the most disliked videos on YouTube. His Baby Baby music video is one of the most thumbs down videos on the internet.
Yeah, and I don't mean to hate on Justin Bieber. I'm just saying that me as who I am, I'm a deep thinking person, and I'd be creating more like Slipknot level music of like, whatever, Down with the Power, Public Enemy kind of stuff. Whereas he is kind of pigeonholed into like, I just want a girlfriend kind of music.
Yeah.
And for me,
I love you, girl.
if I became super famous for doing something that isn't representative of me, that would kill me inside.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? What I just said?
That's an interesting point.
I call it selling your soul to the devil.
Yeah,
because
you're just considered a sellout as well. And when we talk about music, bands do this too. And I don't want to go into this because I don't want people to get upset if I say someone they actually really like. But there's certain bands.
Sorry, Justin Bieber fans.
Yeah, there's certain bands where their audience, they want to start tailoring to a mainstream audience, and what they end up doing is, which is basically referred to as being sellouts, is where they try to tailor it to the mainstream audience, and then they lose a huge portion of their loyal fans because their music's so different, and they lose something in that process.
Because of their success, they have to produce a certain sound. You got to do 3 albums just like that, and they do it, and it's like, this is, they might have 4 massive hits, but the rest is like, they've lost who they are. And I guess that's my question is, how do we as creative people not lose who we are?
Yeah.
When we find success.
Yeah, and that's hard. I mean, I can't really speak to that because I'm not a successful writer, but
could you see that being a problem?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that can come into any part of your life. I think people do that. I'm certainly guilty of this, being kind of a wallflower personality type guy, where I sometimes feel like I have to act to the crowd. And we
play Wonderwall. Okay, fine.
Yeah. Well, we look at something sort of an analogy. It would be like you're single and you're trying to find dates, or you're trying to find attraction and stuff. If you're not being yourself, you might struggle with that.
Is anybody themselves on their first date?
Yeah, but you know what I mean, right? Like if like people are attracted to you. If you're constantly trying to act like someone different, or you're trying to tailor to what you think they like or whatever, it doesn't come across as genuine anymore.
Yeah,
and
it feels forced.
Yeah, a lot of people do this, and this can be seen it can be seen in your personal life, it can be seen in your work, it can be seen in your business, whatever.
What's weird is that I kind of look back at myself. Sometimes I'm driving, and like I have a flashback of how I used to.
Do you actually drive like that?
Yeah, I drive 10 to 2, always 10 to 2. And I'll be like, oh my God. Because I'll think of something that I did when I was 21. And I thought I was being my true self, but it was not an authentic representation of who I was. Which I think as an artist is kind of difficult, because we can look back at our work and be like, oh my God, that's embarrassing.
Yeah.
Right?
Self-reflection is important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But who we were then is just not who we are. We're constantly developing, hopefully.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And that's the problem with regrets and stuff, right?
Yeah.
And that's something I've struggled a lot with too. Like I mentioned a couple of times, trying not to regret mistake. Because like you said, like I made a lot of mistakes early in my, we'll call it, writing career, when I started writing seriously, where I didn't know stuff. And I did dumb things. Like I was telling you before, I shared my very first draft of anything I wrote with a whole bunch of people. Yeah. And it sucked. Like it wasn't very good.
What did they say?
Well, I don't even think most people read it.
That's great.
Another thing too is a lot of people, and they mean well, they'll be like, oh yeah, I'll read it, but they just don't. Yeah. I mean, people
they want to be encouraging, but
and that happens. But I did have to like pry a few people. Like I know you read it. So, give me feedback, and a few people actually did give feedback.
Right.
I think a lot of them were trying to be sensitive to me, to my feelings and stuff. So. But I kind of read between the lines. I'm like, okay, there's a common theme here. A lot of them were bored, especially early on in the book. So something wasn't working. So, I mean, at the same time, I regret sharing it with so many people when I know it wasn't ready to be shared with people. But I learned a lot. And so, yeah, I wasted a lot of time. If I could go back and do it all over again, of course, I'd be way more efficient and get more done. But this is a learning process. I mean, we learn through failure, right? So...
We don't learn through success, right?
Well, this is just a point. Like if you're a one-hit wonder, your very first book, you just throw it out there, boom, and you're successful overnight. How do you know now for your second book? What if your second book is just garbage? Yeah. People have this expectation. You've set the bar so high, but you've only written one book. Yeah. Most authors out there that publish books regularly, and that's what they do, they write dozens of books. You know how many books actually Stephen King has written? It blew my mind. He's written like 60 or something.
Oh, yeah.
A lot. And on top of that, he has other published stuff too. He's got novellas and short stories, most of which I've never even heard about. So,
I almost wonder that if to have immediate success would be like, that might almost be a tragedy in and of itself. Because it's like, okay, well, now what do I do? Mm-hmm. Right?
You don't
and there's this constant expectation, and you don't know who you are as an artist.
Yeah.
So you keep producing, and then that's how you get pigeonholed, the selling yourself to the devil, so to speak, right? Because you're like, I don't know what else to do. They really like that. I'm going to keep doing that. Mm-hmm. And sure, maybe you have your cult following, but you as a person, you're like, what am I doing? Mm-hmm. Right? I've lost myself.
Yeah. Yeah, having initial success would be cool. Like, you don't have to spend 10 years perfecting your craft.
Right.
But, you don't have that knowledge, right? Like I've said earlier, with music or whatever, there's people out there who are great. Like, there's authors out there that write books, like I said, I've never even heard of. And they write really good books, and they're not famous or anything, right?
Do you think it's because they don't want to be famous?
I don't know about that. I think everyone wants to be successful. I think everyone wants to.
Yeah.
For me.
But that depends on what is the definition of success.
Yes. Like, if you were to ask me, do you want to be a famous author? I'd probably be lying if I said no.
Right.
I would love to be a famous author.
Yeah.
But I would like, kind of like baby steps, I would like to be able to have writing as my job. Like, that's what I do. That's what I spend X amount of hours a day. I can feed myself. I pay my utility bills.
Yeah.
That's what I would like. So
I would, yeah.
For me, that's the stone I'm trying to get to. Before I get to that, I'm never going to stop reaching. I want to, I would, like I said, I'd like to be a successful, well-known author. But that's I'm not letting that kind of blind the stepping stones to get there, right? So I think it's important to have those, we'll call them achievable goals.
Yeah.
And I think that's important for anything in your life, right?
The other thing too about success, and success is such a strange thing, but to become successful at a young age when your brain isn't developed, I think is another very dangerous thing, right? Like, it's almost better to figure it out. You're 30 now, mm-hmm. right? Now's a good time. You know who you are. Now's a good time to have some success, some notoriety in what you do. But imagine if when you were 12 mm-hmm. and people were like, man, you're an amazing star. There's no wonder why people get addicted to Coke, right? Like, they're like, yeah, I can do whatever I want, because you don't know who you are.
Stupid shit
say
on
stupid
camera.
Shit, right? Because they just don't have
the life skills or the life experience. Yeah.
So that's why I kind of feel for some people like that, because it's like, damn, they never had a chance to be a kid.
Yeah. Right?
And we talk about failures and criticisms. It's a great time to experience it when you're young and you're not crushed by it. Mm-hmm. Then, and then when you're older, you can kind of take it.
Yeah.
Right? So, the last question is, you talked about self-publishing and traditional publishing.
Yeah. So, for those that don't know, really quick, there's basically two forms of publishing. If self-publishing, which has really taken off over maybe the last 10 years. Mm-hmm. This was sort of not really a thing if you go further back. And that is basically, so for me, how I did it was I found a platform. You got like Amazon, you got Kobo. There's other ones.
You can sell anything on Amazon, right?
Yeah. Well, so they have these publishing platforms where you put your work on there, and so in the case of Amazon, which I don't use, but I do know about, you put it on there, you use a platform. They market it for you. They have these little advertisements when you're on there and stuff. You can search for it. They take royalties though. So I think it's 70%. So if your book is $3, then you get...
They take 70%?
No, sorry, you get 70%.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, if your book is $3, quick math, you get like $2.20 or something.
Yeah.
So that's how that works. So basically, you're giving them a little bit of money. I use Kobo, which is actually free for me. I get 100% of my royalties. The catch is they actually don't pay me until I make at least $50 a month, which doesn't seem like a lot, but as a new author, you'd be very surprised.
Yeah.
I haven't got a paycheck yet, so that just shows you how much I've actually sold.
Yeah.
But right now,
we're holding this for you in trust.
Yeah, basically. But right now, my book is free, and that's part of the reason. I'm trying to for me, it's just I just want people to
get it out there.
I'd rather see that people have read 500 copies than I've made $500. Mm-hmm. To me, that money right now is not that important.
Right.
So that's basically what self-publishing is. You're cutting out the publisher. You're doing a lot of that yourself. There's a lot of disagreement between. So you can have like someone professionally edit your work. You can have someone. I actually have a friend of mine who does digital artwork. She did my book cover for me, so I paid her $70.
Yeah.
That's really all I spent on this book, by the way. So everything else I did myself.
That and time, of course.
And time,
the ultimate resource.
Yeah, the ultimate. Yeah, which is probably a crazy amount of money if you think about it. So that's kind of how it worked for me. Is I wrote it, I revised it, I edited it all myself. I paid for a book cover. I found a platform that was free, Kobo, and I put it on there, and that's kind of self-publishing in a nutshell. Now, there's obviously a lot more going on if you want to like print your book.
Right.
You'll pay a company to put it in print, which is expensive. Editing services are very expensive too, which is why I didn't do it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's
very expensive.
It's super expensive.
Yeah.
It's like just like.
It's based on the amount of words.
Yeah, and like a cheap is like 2 cents a word. Now from this book, my book is 42,000 words, which is small. Right. 2 cents. That just think about how expensive that is. That's like $4,000.
Yeah.
That's expensive.
That you might not get back.
No, you probably won't. You're almost certainly not getting that back.
Right.
Traditional publishing is where you have a book. You will look for an agency. Yeah. And ergo an agent. Right. Who you want to represent you. So what you do, and there's a process here. It's pretty formal. It's called a query letter. It's like a resume. You put it on there. This is why I think you should represent me. My book is so and so. Blah blah blah. Hi, bye. And then you send it to them, and then they go, "Hey, I would like to read your manuscript," which is basically your work. They read it. If everything goes well, they make you an offer. You can accept. You can search around for someone that might be a better fit. Then what they do is they do all that legwork that you could have done or maybe skipped for the self-publishing. They pay for it to be edited, copy edited, which is basically like if your paragraph structures are horrible, like they'll have someone professionally like construct it and all that stuff. They'll edit it. And then they do the marketing and they do the searching for the publisher.